lifestyle designers, this is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com, and this is part 2 of this ongoing series on the longevity cultures or longevity societies we see around the world that display unique levels of human lifespan potential. And we're just examining the characteristics that are present and common among all of them, because these are the things we also start to see in a lot of the longevity research and research on centenarians that is happening in the world right now. So we've already discussed diet and concluded that eating a 90 or over 90% of your diet as plant-based foods is really the key optimal factor here that is present in all 8 of these cultures. Another factor is definitely, that's up there, is going to be your level of physical activity. And what was found with all these cultures, they don't really have gyms except for the Western culture that was Loma Linda, California. They do have gyms and access to sort of the types of exercise that we are more familiar with. And that I'm not harping on this form of exercise. It's obviously a newer development that some of the more traditional cultures don't have access to. But what these older cultures had was a very agricultural type based society, so if their career or their lifestyle involved a lot of farming and gardening, that was their exercise, so to speak. They were constantly moving and working with their body in larger movements, whereas today you see a lot more micro movements, such as working at a desk. Anything you can think of where you're not moving something with larger muscle groups, and you're using the finer motor movements of your body, such as your hands, your fingers, even just more mental work, working on a computer. That's going to be leading to more tension throughout your body and emotional tension, whereas when you're connected to the ground, connected to your living space, and using larger muscle groups, that's really the way we're designed to move and work. And I'm by no means saying quit your day job if it happens to be involve finer muscle work, such as working on a computer. But we just have to take into account the lifestyle factors that these other cultures had going for them. And we can mimic them to the best of our ability in our current situation in modern culture. So Dan Buettner's book, The Blue Zones, what he really noticed was, and his team of course, not just him alone there, but they noticed that these cultures really relied on walking on foot to get around town to do their errands. They often live in very hilly areas, so whether they lived in the mountains or very elevated above ocean level areas, that was one factor, or they happened to live on an island. It was a very hilly island and there was a lot of up and down motion. So that idea of a constant movement really keeps the blood going through the body, it keeps the nutrients being dispersed through your body, and it's prevents stagnation in the body. And as some of these cultures progress and become a little more modernized, you do see them taking up more modern forms of exercise like gyms, martial arts, and actually in Okinawa it's said to be the birthplace of karate. And they definitely have an appreciation for what the body can be capable of when disciplined and trained in a certain way. And definitely in some of the other areas you see, such as the Hunza area and the applications of Pakistan, you see them climbing up and down mountains a lot. They're capable of vastly outpacing people that would visit their area, and they would be employed to carry a lot of the equipment for the people coming to visit their valley, specifically the Hunzas. And they, even on their very low-calorie diet, because their food and nutrition was so dense in minerals and vitality, because they were so elevated in such a unique position in the world, they could get by on very little and yet be very robust in strength, vitality, and stamina. And that enabled them to have such great athleticism, but not so much the athleticism that we think of today, such as fast bursts of speed. On that note, I would like to go back to diet here for a second, because I just reminded myself of one other factor that was present among all these cultures, was that they consume less calories on average than you would suspect. So the average typical diet is for an adult male is recommended around 2,000 plus calories, even closer to 2,500 calories a day. Yet typically these cultures were consuming between 1,500 and 1,800 or 1,900 calories a day. I think the average that John Robbins came up with in his book, Healthy at 100, was 1,800 calories a day, and that's just looking at all these cultures and sort of adding it all up and then dividing by 8 or 5 or whatever, however many cultures he was looking at. He determined that 1,800 as sort of the standard. And while they weren't practicing calorie restriction as it's known today by some of the people that study a lot of the scientific research in that area, they just generally had built into their society this idea that eating less resulted in better health and better long-term health and longevity potential. So also a factor here is that they had very nutritionally dense food. They often lived in areas which were fed by spring water or mountain glacial water, such as the Hunzas, and so their crops were very mineral rich, very dense in nutrition, and so they could get by on less because they were getting everything they needed, just with less bulk of the calories. And on another aspect of that, their diets weren't completely devoid of fat either. They were low in animal products, like I mentioned, anywhere from 1 to 10% animal products, but not 0%. That's another factor I'd like to add in. But they had around 25% total calories from fat. So that kind of goes against the very low fat idea, but it's also not really high fat. You know, these cultures had nuts and seeds available to them. They had avocados in some instances. They had a certain amount of animal products. They would have access to coconuts, even in some of the tropical regions. But for the most part, these cultures were actually in temperate regions. There's only 2 that were in tropical regions. So predominantly they are in temperate regions that weren't too hot but weren't too cold. So that's another factor that was present in these, is they lived in mountainous areas. They lived in very mild climates, not too hot, not too cold. And year-round they had very similar climates and temperatures, so there wasn't any drastic changes to like frigid cold winters to boiling, steaming hot summers. So yet another factor I'd like to talk about is their devotion to a very closely knit society and interpersonal relationships, both within the community and within family. What they found with many of these cultures was that the family ties were so strong, they would often live in the same household with the parents and grandparents and the kids, and they wouldn't end up putting the grandparents in old age homes. They had an incredible amount of respect for the elderly, and they recognized them as the wise beings that they are, and they would contribute in the ways they can, but they also took them under their wing when they were getting, to the point where they couldn't really do too many physical tasks, but would be more present just in the household to watch over the kids, for example, while the parents would be doing more physical labor. And of course, these cultures were also, in all cases, very spiritually minded. Whether it was a specific religion of one type or another, it doesn't matter. It's just that they would come together at some point and be involved in a spiritual community as a community, and they weren't cynical, they weren't negative-minded people. And this goes without saying that if you're a negative type of personality, you're actually hampering your body and immune system in a variety of ways, which has been shown quite clearly and demonstrated by psychoneuroimmunology, and that's a whole other topic that I'm not going to get into. But to sum it all up, the main factors throughout these cultures that led to them being such long-lived cultures is diet, which is predominantly plant-based, but not extreme in terms of being low-fat, not too high in sugar, etc. They were involved in physical activity almost constantly, but at a low level. It wasn't over-the-top working out, but in some cases they did have gyms in Loma Linda. They had lived in environments that provided very clean and pristine air, a lot of natural setting with greenery around them, and a lot of sort of hilly type of terrain that promoted the exercise aspect of their lifestyles. And then they also had very closely knit societies, both in the family dynamic as well as the community, and they were spiritually based. So those are the top things. I could go on and on about these, having read about them for a while now, but I'll be going into greater detail in future videos on each of these cultures, and I hope you find them just as interesting as I do, and maybe you can learn a thing or two that you can apply to your own lifestyle, because that's the purpose of these videos, is to help you make changes in your life so that you can be more present and loving and appreciative of the life that you're living. Take care, I'll talk to you later, and live life without limits.